So I was just talking about in my video, I don't know if I'm going to publish that one. I also don't know if I'm going to publish this one. But I was talking about how it's helped me in avoiding purity culture and avoiding ideologies and like authoritarianism. It has helped me to continue to engage even with media that most of the value of it is in nostalgia, because the messages there I really like no longer agree with, like sermons and like music from my old days. On the other hand of that, sometimes I do that and I regret every choice that has led me to this moment, because it forces me to read Death by Living by Andy Wilson. The things this has put me through. Actually, it's just anger. It's anger and disappointment. And then I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, why am I doing this? And I'm like, well, there must be some reason, because I feel drawn to do it. Now, I mean, there is a reason. There is a reason why I would choose to read something by someone that I know that I disagree with their stance on a lot of things, and someone who is like part of a group that's hurt me in the past, rather than just getting similar information from someone who I trust more and like respect more. And I mean, first of all, part of that is that Andy Wilson's book Notes from the Tilt-a-Whirl, I'm actually like partway through recording it to read it aloud. I doubt I'll finish. I recorded it previously and I deleted the recording, and I don't know why I would ever delete it. I kept another one from that time, but anyway, I might do it again and I might not. That book was very influential for me in my early days. I just call them the early days. I don't like the word epiphany, but there's no other word for it. I should probably just make my peace with that word and move on, but I'll never do it. I won't. Anyway, during the early days, he was very influential for me, and his like very sort of exuberant and fleshed, like lighthearted and sort of exuberant like view of God was one that I was really trying to absorb, and honestly mine was very similar at the time. And I don't know if some of the ways that I write or that I wrote came from him, or if we just dovetailed. I don't know. I was a fan. Excuse me. And Tilt-a-Whirl is a cool book still. So I was like, oh, he wrote another book. Let me read it. So I started to read it. And it's like partly good and charming, to me anyway, and partly just, sir, have you ever spoken to the people that you're caricaturing? Have you ever spoken to them in your entire life, ever once? Oh yeah, but like, why do I bother? Well, one of the reasons why I bother is because of nostalgia. Unfortunately, those are like what I grew up with and what got me through pivotal moments. So even though I can add new, better influences, that's still gonna be like my childhood in a sense. And I can't change those associations. And then another reason, I think, funny enough, sometimes it's helpful for me to, instead of just taking a book and being like, I like everything that's written in here and I want to absorb it and learn it verbatim kind of thing, to listen to like a sermon or read a book by someone where I'm like, I don't really trust this person at all. I respect them slightly, very, very slightly, but really not at all either. And I'm here like with an oyster just digging around in there, trying to get the pieces that I like and that I want to use. Is this a discouraging experience? Oftentimes it is, yes. However, it is also empowering sometimes at the same time in a funny way, because in a funny way that I think is like because of my background of being literally like preached at by people and I had to listen to everything they said. It's then given that background again with that it's easy to fall from one thing into what seems like it's opposite, but it's actually just the same thing in a different form. It's easy to then fall, this isn't even the opposite, it's easy to fall from like, okay, I have to listen to the preaching to, okay, there's this book by a prominent thinker person that I respect, trust, and like. I have to listen to everything they say. And I get very nervous sometimes about that. Now, if I know that I do not respect or trust, or give the benefit of the doubt, if I don't give the benefit of the doubt to the author of whatever I am taking in, then the power is with me. And I know that the power is with me, and it is staying with me because I'm not going to let that person, again, I don't respect them really very much. And I respect my own opinion way more than theirs. And again, it's kind of discouraging because, well, you respect your own opinion way more than theirs. This person is unfortunate. But also it's empowering because the whole time the power is with me to kind of, I'm always like on and always like deliberating, what of this is good, what of this can I take, and I usually will change it, and it's like it's a more active process, and it has to stay an active process, and I have to always be remembering that nobody else controls me, that this person doesn't control me, that I only know what's best for me and what I can take in, and that I'm making the decision of which pieces to pick out, and it does feel, again, in moderation, empowering to do this, and it can help also things sink in deeper too, because it's a more active process where you're basically in dialogue would be a mild way to put it, maybe in combat with the author. I'm just used to it too, like I did in my year or so of kind of in between times. I did so much sitting in church, listening to what was being preached and like translating everything in my head to be palatable to me and to be what I knew to be true, and getting like an analogical message that the preacher would have completely disagreed with. But but I could see the thread from one to the other. It is satisfying. It's like making blackout poetry, which is something that I also do and that I also love and highly recommend, especially with material that's ugly or hurtful. It's so empowering. But most recently I was reading Death by Living by N.D. Wilson. And do I have anything to say? I don't know. I think it's an interesting book to me. Because, like, I care, because, again, it was so influential, at least tilt-a-whirl was so influential in my life and shaping the way that I think. So, like, I'm invested whether I would decide to be or not. And it's just so interesting. I think, in the video that I made about what am I going to title it? Nihilism and like purity culture and all that. You can go from an extreme in one direction to an extreme in the other direction. But there's also a phenomenon of being caught awkwardly in the middle somewhere, where you're like, you're so close and yet so far. And that is what I see with this book, especially with Death by. I feel like Tilt-a-whirl was less annoying. I'm gonna reread it, possibly partly to read it aloud, but we'll see. But I feel like it was less annoying. I don't know though. The thing is that, like, and I don't know, I mean, even as I say this, like, as I critique, I'm always like, well, you could probably make the same critiques about me. But I mean, nobody's perfect, but, like, yeah, I am aware that nobody is perfect, and certainly nobody is able of putting forth a perspective in life that's just, like, covers all the bases, and that's absolutely flawless. And indeed, that's kind of what Andy Wilson's book is about. I do have something to say about this. I do. It's coming together, but I've already been talking for like an hour, and I'm also like, I don't want to overshare, because if I start oversharing, then I'll have to not post it. But I don't have a great filter for that. So I try not to record too much, lest it become verbal soup. Yeah. However, I think I do. I think, yeah, less, because, it just, is very interesting. Those books, they're like a butterfly that's crawling upon the ground, but then one of its wings is like misshapen, so it can't get off the ground. It's such an interesting blend of a beautiful vision of the world, and then something that is so dogmatically shuts the door. I shouldn't clap so loud. Shuts the door on that. So I would say that in Tilt-a-whirl and in this other book, he is reformed. I don't know what kind. He's reformed. And he's putting forth, so that tells you all you need to know, maybe. But it really doesn't, because, like I'm saying, there's something good in here. There is. But, sorry, I'm just going into, like, melancholia, because this is the classic case of anybody who is a person of faith but also doesn't entirely subscribe to the dogma. You get caught between two worlds. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. It's coherent in my head. But you get caught between two worlds. And so, like, the things that I can talk about with the people that are my acquaintances and who are in my life are generally very secular, and I kind of don't like mentioning my faith around them, because I think they're gonna think that I'm, like, they're gonna think bad things about me because of that, or, like, be scared of me or feel threatened because of that. I mean, how do you prove that you're one of the nice ones? No. But, like, someone would have to be quite close to me for me to be comfortable talking. And then even then, they don't have an understanding of it, they're not religious themselves, so they don't care, and I can't really explain it or explain, like, why I care, so I get kind of, like, embarrassed about caring. But then, of course, I come over, you spend too much time on the religious side of things, that's depressing for a whole nother reason. People care rather too much. They make stupid fights over stupid things. So, again, I kind of oscillate and I bounce back and forth, but that does leave you with the melancholy of kind of living a double life. It is funny, though, that, like, my double life now is the opposite of what it used to be, or what the idea that was taught to me of a double life is, where, like, you go to church on Sunday and then you sneak around and you smoke and drink on the weekends. I don't smoke or drink, I shouldn't have even said that because that sounds like I think those are bad things. They would be bad for me. Anyway, but that's the idea, right? And then my life is more like I go out and I live my life day to day, and then I come home and I'm like, oh, Catholic mysticism. I'm not looking at this. I'm not a Catholic. Or at least I'm not one of the, it's kind of like the things that I hide are like the opposite of what you think. But again, that just goes to show that it's not about the content of it. It's about the pattern of it, of like having a certain thing that's socially acceptable in your social circle, and then a certain thing that's not, but that is personal to you, and that's a part of who you are. Which I guess in the original case would be smoking, drinking, and going out on the weekends, which does the person who's maligning that have a sense of what that entails, or anything beyond that vague caricature? Probably not, or at least probably not for many years if they themselves were converted out of being secular. And that is my issue, and I wish I had the book, but I just have the Kindle, because I would make my own personal comments on that book. But that is the issue that I have with N.D. Wilson. What did I say? I said it was coherent, I was going somewhere, and I don't remember what I was going to tie back in. Damn it. Living in two worlds, maybe, and just like, yeah, being like thwarted or like caught. No, what? No. Whatever. The problem that I have with him is that, once again, so the thesis of his book is that the world is God's spoken world. So it is of words. It's a narrative and a story. It's word made flesh. So it is every particle imbued. This man is a young earth creator. Okay. It is every particle imbued with spirit and life, and like you don't need to go separating yourself from it. He gives the analogy of like the world is like a carnival. You go on the rides, and you're a kid at that, and maybe you want to be away from it all. You go on the Ferris wheel, you get to the top of there with all of your fancy big words, and you think that you've escaped life and the living of it and the death of it, but really you're just still in it. You're just denying that you are. So the thesis is that open your eyes and like notice everything, and it's kind of like Annie Dillard for the time being in the style of it, except a little bit less artsy, but it's sort of that kind of kaleidoscopic view of all of the sharp details of the world that don't fit into any neat narrative, that annoy us or that inspire us. And like he's describing like a snowstorm of all these tiny, perfect, beautiful little snowflakes, but there's too many of them for them to even be beautiful anymore. We complain about them. We turn them into this gray like slop. And in Death by Living, he talks about living to your fullest, and kind of like life is meant to be used and used up, and you don't want to hold back, and like you want to like give it your all. And he talks about just a very like fresh view of the world at every moment, and not falling into cliches or into sugarcoating things, because it's all God spoken, right? His argument for this is, and he's talking to more of a Christian audience, I think, who is the more dogmatic, traditional Christian. So his thing is like, it's all God's spoken word, and have you thought about what that entails? And I like that worldview, and I kind of maybe am more like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin in the exact way that I like would put it. I don't know. But he does convey in his passages, and again, certainly did to me as a little one, this exuberance of life and this refusal to fit into categories and attention like everywhere bursting forth, and also, of course, all of that imbued with spirit and imbued with meaning on account of being words, so to speak. And then, of course, the fractal, or the fractal, yeah, nature of like, we speak in words and language, but then you can think of the physical reality around us as also as a kind of language or symbol. So that gets into like Gestalt and symbolic philosophy or theology or neuroscience also, that I'm very into. Anyway, that part of, and that vision, I love it. I like it a lot. And he's obviously someone who takes a lot of zest in life and has had a good life, I would say, and like not from what he talks about, because he does share quite a few personal stories, has had a pretty classic like apple pie like life, you know, growing up in church, having grandparents and parents, growing up, going to college and getting married and having kids, all that. And yeah, he's coming from a place of happiness and security, and I kind of like that sometimes. I like reading that, because, for instance, before I was reading Christian Wyman, who has a similar thing. He's talking about incarnational language and poetry and all of that, and he's really gorgeous, and so like, he's someone that again I do respect and trust, but he's dying of cancer, and he like, I know there's so much sorrow and there's so much angst and there's so much existentialism and there's so much like the absence of God and meaning and unmeaning that I frankly don't understand at this point. I agree with it or understand it in theory, but I just haven't had experiences where I even know what that means. Like, it's just words to me, a lot of that. Anyway, so I was like, well, I'm done reading this. I can't handle any more of this. We just read something like more lighthearted. But then, of course, with the lightheartedness, there's also something that is completely against the very principles that he is putting forth. And let me find an example. Well, okay, you know what? First of all, he is a young earth creationist and believes in a literal Garden of Eden and a literal Adam and Eve. And yet he also talks about quarks and leptons and atoms in his book. Insane cognitive dissonance. No idea how he does that. It's weird. And then he also, one thing that he does a lot from the opening of the book and all throughout, this is from Death by Living. I'm sure tilt-a-whirl does things similarly, but this is the one I read recently. He is talking about God imbuing and speaking all of creation, all of it, even the tiniest little dust mite, even the little pink eye that gets in your eye and infects you, as God. His words. Sorry, he isn't a panentheist. But, and yet, when he describes people, especially when he describes certain types of people, like, he seems to be very against hipsters, and I'm like, who even, that's not, what, who are you, I feel like you're just mad at a class, is that still a thing? It's not to me, so I have no idea what he's even talking about. So he's like, yeah, the hipsters with their flannel and their glasses and their, like, coffee, and I'm like, is it 2014? who are you mad at? Confusing to me. But when he's describing people of the world, unbelievers, as he would unironically call them, I guess, he will use just caricatures that to me say that he has not meaningfully listened or opened his heart or had any meaningful conversation or relationship with a person in that category, or else he wouldn't describe them like that. He would describe them in the same way as he describes his children and himself and human life in general terms, physical life in general terms. But then these certain like blind spots in these certain categories is just suddenly like the most caricatured thing. And I'm like, buddy, take your own advice. You just said that like all of this is God, but in believing, he doesn't quite fully believe that all of it, I guess, is God or is God's words, because he holds himself within this strict dogmatic narrative. He still does hold himself within the strict dogmatic narrative of, again, literal fruit, literal Adam and Eve, literal garden, and then literal cross and resurrection. And I'm not entirely positive of his theory of atonement. I think he does believe that like Jesus took God's wrath, and he believes in some sort of hell, not pure, the worst form of eternal conscious torment, but some sort of it. And then he definitely believes that Jesus is the only way. In fact, he believes that the Reformation is the only way, because he shit talks the Catholics and Orthodox people too. He's very snooty about it too. And clearly thinks he's better than everyone else. So clearly. Yeah. So again, it's like you see this world like view and vision that I think is insightful, and in fact it touched me. It still kind of does touch me, that is trying to come through, but then it just gets hampered by this dogma that he finds the need to hold on to. And it's like a contradiction in terms. Like his own writing, his own logic condemns that type of shallowness. So I just keep picking at that because it's just so fascinating to me. Well, compelling to me. I'll give you 2 examples other than the young earth creationism thing. He says here, he's talking about here how God's kingdom is not just a spiritual kingdom, but it's a physical one too. And the physical world matters and is important. Very familiar theme to me. But then how he kind of brings this to its head is he says, hold up, where do I want to start here? Yeah, he says, when the younger set would like to go along, I don't even know if I can read. I can. When the younger, it's just he thinks he's so much better than everyone. Ooh, it bothers me. And then I'm always like, am I this bad? I read something like this and I'm like, is this how I sound? Hopefully not. But I don't think so, because again, I fall into I do the same class of things, of course, being human and imperfect. However, I do recognize that I have a way for me and other people have a way for them, and he just does not fundamentally recognize that. Even though, again, the worldview and the exuberance that's trying to break through would very much lead to that. In fact, led me to that, because I read him in my early formation days, and I kind of took things in a totally different direction, or maybe just took them further, or followed different threads out to their logical conclusions, and I got to one place and he is in quite a different place, and it makes me sad, and it makes me like confused. I think just confused on a deep level and just sad. And I'm like, well, I don't technically have to care. Like, there's plenty of other, for instance, this very beautiful piece of mystical Catholic very sweet. But I guess I do care, so I have to deal with the fact that I do care and get what I can out of it. Anyway, an example of what I'm talking about is, he says, when the younger set would like to go along with the godless but inevitably self-righteous crowd, they encounter certain physical requirements. Welcome to dietary indignation, resentment of private property, the anathema of soda, and pious affirmations of a woman's right to kill, so long as she isn't killing polar bears with unholy diesel. Luckily, white brow here, God doesn't care about any of those things. Close one, right? I know. Ink your skin and pierce your nipples. Get yourself a steady IV drip of guiltless self-affirmation. Serve dark urges and call them lovely. Demand that others feed the poor. It's so, again, such a caricature of like, oh yeah, this man is in his 40s. He's like, yeah, I don't even know what voice to do. The young people with their, we can't even drink sugar and sugar's evil, but I bet he would also be mad at us for like, not body shaming people. And we can't even eat the gluten, and they're all commies, and they get tattoos. Was tattoos bad? Like, this man, he's like, he starts off with the affirmation that the entire world, in its physicality, including the inconveniences, including physical death, including, he mentions lust and physical desire, including kids getting the flu and you know, all the different insects of the world and the people that annoy you, all of that is the divine word. All of it is equally important in the eyes of the Creator, and we take in as much of the wonder as we can. And then he says, tattoo is bad. Like, it's like little child, little Bill. It's like this beautiful cathedral, except he probably hates cathedrals because maybe he thinks they're too Catholic. But this beautiful, I don't actually know if he has anything against actual cathedrals. I know he has stuff against like icons, religious icons, but he hasn't said anything bad about cathedrals. So let's just assume you have this beautiful cathedral, and then on the side of it you have the little building blocks or something. I'm just like, bro, what do you mean? Have you just the shallowness, the way that he sees anything outside, in the end, of his own ideology, which somehow he has made to include this idea of, to include, you know, his ideas about living life in the moment and seeing God in all things that are not quite, I mean, the people that I grew up with wouldn't have liked that, wouldn't have liked a lot of the stuff he says, or the language that he uses. So he includes that, but then when he looks outside of that, like, he can see nothing in people that, like, don't essentially, like, share, I guess, that aren't Christians, because he says he has other Christian denominations, but he also kind of scorns them. But, like, I guess if you're not Christian, suddenly you go from being a full human being to just being, like, you can't soda, the anathema of soda, and polar bears and the diesel, and tattoos bad. And this is not just the one, this is just the most egregious one, I think. It's the longest one. But it's definitely not the only time that he goes off like this. It makes it very clear that that is the extent of his opinions on who human beings are who are not Christians. Which is, I don't know. I guess it's either funny or it's sad or it's frustrating, depending on how invested you want to be. He didn't, yeah. There was one other example that I feel really caps this whole thing off, and just, like, demonstrates what I'm talking about. Let me find it. So he is here describing a very raucous, like, family trip through Europe. And he's talking about the, art on the walls versus the living art of all the people and the stream of life and all of the craziness of taking 9 children. They're not all his. Half of them are his. Anyway, through Europe. So you can, and again, the thesis is everything is God. Well, he wouldn't say everything. Everything is God's words, and therefore everything. Personally, I don't see why the problem with saying everything is God, but he would probably, but whatever. He's saying here, yeah, we get it. But then he says, early Sunday morning, we followed the church bells through old cobbled Heidelberg toward worship. We were late and embarrassed. It was going to be awkward enough already, strolling in with our hordes. But now we were going to make a full-on scene with our tardiness. So, you get it. The ragtag people. He's not trying to say, oh, we're so prim and proper and holy and all that. In fact, he's making an argument against overly prim holiness in this entire book and his entire theses here. And he says this is a church that, this is an old church with a lot of Reformation history, so he wants to experience the Reformation. He says here, and then I heard the rattle of 2 bicycles. A young blonde woman was frantically and guiltily pedaling toward us. A young dark-haired lad pedaled beside her. They were both disheveled and wearing the clear look of recent Nookie participants, along with their black robes. I did not know what Nookie meant. Apparently that means sex. That must be a Midwesternism. Maybe. Anyway, they leapt off their bicycles, locked them up while furtively whispering to each other, unlocked a side door, and snuck inside. We rounded the church and entered through the main doors, expecting that those 2 might be delinquent choir members. He did the scripture reading, she did the preaching. Clearly, the Reformation had moved on. We left in search of a Starbucks. And then back to the shenanigans. And yeah, I think that says it all. That says it all. He says that he's everywhere in the books fighting against this very prim outward or prim, like, uptight, starched idea of holiness. He even himself is late and seems almost proud of that, proud of the chaotic picture that he causes with his family, straight married family. And then he clearly draws the line somewhere, not even draws the line somewhere, draws it pretty damn closely. Because as soon as there is other people who are in authority in the church who are late, and as soon as they have sex, premarital sex, is it premarital? I don't know. And as soon as a woman preaches, then he literally leaves. Yeah, he literally leaves and closes it. It speaks for itself. And I love that that's in there because I don't even have to really say anything. That just speaks for itself. But, yeah. I kind of... I want to still, I think there's still value in the perspective of the world as divine song, the world as divine story, in all of the mundanity of it, and that you should live fully and embrace it with both hands. And I still have a nostalgic connection to this guy, and that is what it is. And, I think it's a compliment to him, but it's like, I don't know, it's a lot of grief. Like, deconstruction, reconstruction is a lot of grief because just like he is awkwardly caught in the middle of Reformation dogmatism and this theophanic, almost like panentheist, like God is everywhere speaking worldview, and just like he's caught between those two, I am kind of caught between seeing and not being able to deny what I get from his writing and what I enjoy from it and what is so tender to me, especially because of the time that I was first reading it, like, and yet feeling all shades of everything from deep anger to hilarity at the places where it's so thwarted and so ugly and so small-minded. And I can't really deny either of those sides. I can't just read through it and be like, yeah, this is all great. But I can't, again, do the purity culture thing, and I can't completely separate myself from it, because, well, like I said, I happen to care. I happen to find value in it that I can't just unsee, and I happen to have nostalgic associations that I will hold on to, and I don't intend to leave those behind. However, I would very much like to make blackout poetry with some of it. But yeah, I guess to cap off what I was saying in the purity culture video, and then also here, like, that's kind of, it's complex. It's more complex than just this thing is good and that thing is bad. And as I have honestly and fully engaged with life and also deconstruction, reconstruction, I've had to stay in that sort of muddled, like muddy place, and I can't just completely abstain from like either side, but I have to unite them in myself so that, yeah, I mean, I say, well, what if this book was like it is, except better, and I would say more itself and more freely that central message which it is trying to express? Well, I don't know, I guess I need to then be the one with that perspective, and who expresses that. That's like what I can contribute. And I'm going to close by reading a passage from Tilt-a-whirl that I think is cute and expresses, I'm not sure if this is the best expression in all the books, I don't remember it enough, but it is an expression of kind of his central thesis here. There was a day years ago, a day between the winter and spring, when the sun was beginning to flex and find its way through our angled atmosphere, and the ice was becoming living water, dripping off needled trees. I sat shivering on a log that had fallen across a stream, watching the water rush beneath me with its rounded back. Small wooded hills surrounded us. It was there, listening to the hum of liquid hurry, that I first began to feel these thoughts, when I began to feel like a word among words, understanding the divine language of creation, but unable to speak it myself. I knew what God was saying. He gave me eyes so that I might see him say it. He gave me ears so I could pick up the rhythms and clatters and rhymes. My tongue can taste these words, the water, the pine needles, even the log that held me, but I cannot say them. We have given them names, shortcutting them with smaller sounds that fit in our mouths. Tree, I say, and you know what I mean. Tree, God says, and there is one, but he doesn't say the word tree, he says the tree itself. He needs no shortcut. He's not merely calling one into existence. His voice is its existence. That thing in your yard, that mangy apple or towering spruce, that thing is not the referent of his word. It is his word and its referent. If he were to stop talking, it wouldn't be there. Imagine a poem written with such enormous three-dimensional words that we had to invent a smaller word to reference each of the big ones, that we had to rewrite the whole thing in shorthand, smashing it into 2 dimensions just to talk about it. Or don't imagine it. Look outside. Human language is our attempt at navigating the divine language. It is us running between the lines of God's epic, climbing on the vowels, and building houses out of the consonants. See that thing? What thing? That huge pile of stone that climbs to where the air gets thin? Yes, it has a lot of syllables. Let's call it a mountain, okay? When I say mountain, that's what I mean. It'll be easier than building one every time. Is it supposed to blow up? Let's call it a volcano.